Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark DeVoe.
And I am Mark State, and a huge, huge thank you, as always, to the people who keep this podcast going. That's those wonderful people on Patreon who support us via Patreon, and also the folk in the Bestseller Academy, our academates. They keep those wheels rolling. They keep us trucking. We got 2 new patrons this week as well. Make room, everyone. Budge up. Make some room at the back for Jenny Williams and Jen O'Ryan. Thank you both for joining us. It's wonderful to have you on board. Get in there, have fun with all those deep dives and all that extra bunts that we have for our podcast supporters, our Patreon supporters. Thank you.
Absolutely. And just so people realise, patron supportage is not just for people called Jen or Jenny. So if your name begins with an ABC all the way up to Z, come and join us. Come and join in the fun. But thank you so much to everyone who's making this podcast happen. So, Mr. Stay, you had a bit of an exciting week, didn't you? Blimey. Where'd you start?
I'm still buzzing. So, new book came out, Ghost of Ivy Barn, had a launch party, and it was everything I wanted it to be and more. It was just incredible. So we had this had a launch party at Wallstones in Canterbury, and first in-person launch party since the end of Magic, and the first in-person launch party for the Woodville books, and it was incredible. We had a whole bunch of people, and it went out live as well. We live streamed it too. We had cake, we had witches and wizards, we had George dressed as a ghost, we had a special little extra bit for people watching it online. And one of my old teachers turned up. No, this is brilliant, because one of my teachers, Miss Maloney, who taught me at Woodville School in Leatherhead,
Really?
and she was one of those teachers who told me, yeah, actually, you're good at this writing, like you should keep at it. And she introduced me to Ursula Le Guin and the Earthsea book, so it triggered that whole fantasy, love of fantasy. She came with her son and with her granddaughter, and her granddaughter's reading the book now, and she emailed me today and she said, oh, it's so good. And the thing is, this book is dedicated to 3 of my teachers. So there's Mrs. Godfrey, who taught me at Duncombe School in North London, who, said, be creative. Miss Maloney at Woodville in Leatherhead, who, as I said, encouraged me. And also to Mrs. Wright at Thurfield in Leatherhead, who, got me writing seriously as well. And she didn't know that until she picked the book up and saw the dedication. So she was kind of blown away.
Well,
yeah.
I was about to ask, had she come along because she'd heard about the dedication, so she didn't know. Wow. Did you get a reaction when she found that? Because that must be a magical moment for a teacher.
It was wonderful. We had a photo together. She doesn't do photos very often, but we had a photo together, and it was very special, and it was great, and it was very, very totes emotion. So yeah, that was great. And yeah, I signed loads of books. And I got my stamp, and everyone got a free bookmark. I met listeners. We had podcast listeners come along, including Inkborn Blade, the guy who did his 200 words on the morning of his wedding. He was there, and his wife came too, so they're still together. That's good. Many years of happiness to all of you. So yeah, it was, and it was one of these things as well. We were, because it's quite a lot of technical gubbins going on. 5 minutes before it was all due to start, we had 6 people in the audience, and the Wi-Fi went down. And I thought, oh, great, 6 people. The Wi-Fi went down. Tech team jumped into it, got back online immediately. And then suddenly everyone came in.
Everyone comes in. I know. Why do people do that? It drives me bonkers. It's almost like they're all just waiting outside the room. It's like, right, we're going to do a flash mob. Don't tell him. Ready. All right, everyone, running. Because every single event,
nerves, man.
It's
not good
awful
for your nerves. Yeah.
But actually, it's good for people to realise that when you look back, and you actually see just how many people, everyone shows up 2 minutes late. I mean, it's just what we do, and it's guilty as charged. But I think that's fantastic to get that many people coming along. But I was going to ask as well, because, I mean, in the old days, it was about, filling some chairs in a room and chatting with people. There were no cameras. There was definitely no Wi-Fi, and sometimes no bookshop. But how much extra work is it? Because you've done, obviously, over COVID, you did a lot of book launches just on, I say just, but like online, and there was a lot of whizzy stuff going on. But it felt almost like I mean, I couldn't believe it. I was watching it and I couldn't believe how you actually had multiple camera angles. There were moments where you were talking and then there was like a shot of someone laughing in the audience. I'm like, this is like a TV show. Like what? So how much work goes into planning something like that? And look, would you recommend it to other people listening?
This is where I have to thank Douglas Ray. Douglas Ray is a listener. He lives in Canterbury. He dropped me a line and said, I've got this bit of kit and it's a little box, like size of a shoebox. And it's got these little buttons on it where you plug cameras into it and you can switch between cameras. I looked it up. It's quite a pricey piece of kit. This is not something you can just run out and get yourself.
It's not like $9.99 on Amazon then?
It's like 460 quid or something like that. And it just does this thing. And it's terrific. And Kai, my daughter's boyfriend who lives with us, brilliant camera operator who's filmed my trailers. His camera is the same brand, so they all connects up. It was wonderful because Kai was doing it, Douglas was doing it. They're nerdily talking about ISO and stuff before, and the lighting and everything is great. So, it was quite technical. This is not something where you can go, anyone can do this. It is quite techie, but Douglas said, I can do this. And we met beforehand and he showed me the kit. He said, I'm going to switch between camera 1, camera 2. He said, we could even have a remote camera, moving around. I was like, no, let's keep it simple.
Let's put a drone in the room for, just for fun.
You know what? He could, and our friend Jeremy is qualified to fly camera drones. So, we could. I
thought the drone, when you talked about a ghost last week, I thought drone, because I was actually in a theatre production once and they had Tinkerbell. It was Peter Pan and Tinkerbell was a drone and it flew over the heads of the audience and there were quite an elderly population in the audience. And I was quite concerned about that drone, like losing power. Right? It would have been quite a spectacular finish to Tinkerbell and possibly a couple of people in the audience. But no, it was really well done. I was kind of blown away how you set it up, and awesome just to be able to do it in a bookstore. And ironically, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you see the kind of beauty of this cycle that's happened, but you started life working in Waterstones, if I'm right. I mean, obviously there was all the dodgy stuff we did before, like Video Store and stuff like that. But Waterstones is where you started working and actually writing, as people will have listened to the podcast prior, will know about those stories. And isn't it an amazing circle that you've now, with the launch of your third book, you're actually an author in Waterstones with cameras and an audience. I mean, it's bonkers, isn't it? Really, when you think
it was pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy. And we the other thing is we have a bit right towards the end where the camera cuts to an empty bookstore and all you can see is George in his ghost costume and makeup and he comes right up to the camera. And we had to pre-record that. So we did that about 20 minutes before the whole thing happened as well. And there are people wandering. We had to wait for people to stop wandering around in the back and making noises like, okay, action, George, go. And he did it. And he, it took 3 takes, but we got it, but yeah, it was weird. What's also weird is on the Friday, the day after the launch, my publisher said, okay, there's 3 Waterstones in Kent. They've got your book. You can go there and sign them. So Friday, I was driving around Kent, going from bookshop to bookshop, going into car parks, paying for my parking. I thought, going into bookshops, I thought, hang on, I'm a bloody sales rep again. But the only thing is, I can't claim the mileage, So but it was great. I went to the Waterstones in Thanet, who I know well, and they were wonderful. I went to the Waterstones in Ashford, which opened just before I stopped being a rep. So I'd only been in there a couple of times and they were lovely and really friendly. They're talking about doing an event later in the year. And then I went into Waterstones Tunbridge Wells, which used to be, a mainstay. And the shop hasn't changed a bit, frankly. It was like stepping back. I was walking through. It was like stepping back in time. It was so strange. But I had a lovely day signing stock for all those stores. So yeah, it's been weird. It's been weird. But if you want to watch it again, I'll put a link in the show notes so you can watch it. We open with some my trailer and a couple of other video bits, and then we go live. if you want to come to another event, I'm doing another event with FMA Dixon, who's been on the podcast, at the Little Green Bookshop in Herne Bay on July 30th, 6:30. And I'm doing a signing with David Lee Stone, who was on a couple of episodes ago. And what a reaction we've had to that episode. At Waterstones Thanet on Saturday, 27th August, 12 to 2. I'll put links in the show notes for those.
You're going to have to, you realise on your website, Mark, you're going to have a gigs tab now.
I do.
International tour.
I do have a diary and events tab. Oh yeah, baby. Oh yeah.
When's the world tour T-shirt? I want a world tour T-shirt. But for people, but this is fun because for people who might just be listening to this podcast for the first time, or they may have been listening to us for a number of years, but they're starting to write their first book. They're coming up to finishing their first book. I mean, what's really important to take from all this, folks, is that a book launch doesn't just have to be about you sticking it on Amazon and sitting by yourself with a cup of tea and saying, yay, my book's live, I'm now an author. It's not, there's so much more that you can do. What advice would you give people if it's, say, their first book and they're thinking of doing something on some kind of scale where they're going out into the public? What do you think they should be thinking about doing?
I think cozy up with a local bookshop. And it doesn't have to be a massive bookshop. It doesn't have to be a big Waterstones. It could be a local indie, or it could be a library, or it could, if it's something that ties in thematically, maybe there's
like location, maybe.
A location. Yeah, exactly that. Just remember, it's not about having a big crowd. It's celebrating the publication of a book. So don't expect there to be hundreds of people. Put on a show. I think, it's, I don't want to put pressure on people to have it all singing and dancing the way that I was saying, because we had Merlin and Raven there and a guy called Andrew, and they're all witches and wizards, all dressed up, and special thank you to them for coming as well. So, find your own level, what you're comfortable with. If you just want a few friends and a bit of cake, you can do that. If you want to go kicking and dancing and make it all fancy, then do that as well. But the thing is, it's not about selling books either. You don't necessarily sell a lot of books. It's a celebration. It's something that gives you something to put on social media as well and go, hey, look at this. This was amazing. People are celebrating the launch of a book. Or, if you prefer, just do it online, because that's a totally legit option now.
Well, it can be an easier way for some people to just kind of, and I mean, because, going full on, I think the idea of going to a local bookshop, I think everyone should do that, because I think even if it's just getting a few friends and it's using that as a location, brings people in the shop, booksellers love that. Yeah. But maybe an online, so that you can get friends in, but you can also get other people around the world who might not be able to attend in person. But I do think it's important to mark that occasion, because that's the thing we don't do in life enough. We don't mark occasions. We don't have enough moments in life where we actually say, this is really important.
Especially if we've all been locked away for 2 years, as well.
But even without that, I think even before COVID, people did not. We all hit these milestones and then we just rush through them, and then the next day we're thinking, right, what do I want to do next? Or, oh, is that it? Okay, what do I do next? It's about stopping and pausing and taking a breath and acknowledging the importance of that moment and the accumulation of all the work that you've done, all that hard work you've done to write that book. I mean, when we launched Back to Reality, obviously we did that kind of 24-hour. Yeah. And we were lucky because we had an audience. We had this podcast. We got to celebrate with everyone. But I remember, like, after we finished that podcast, I went back into the house and Jen had set up a surprise party, and there was like 25 people there. And we had some cake, and it was just lovely. It was just, and it was special. And it's for me, the moments are, this is the key. It's at the end of the year when you look back and say, what were the highlights of my year? I guarantee you, Mr. Stay, your book launch is on that list already, isn't it?
Yeah, right? Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what it's about. It's about what I like to call DWLs, days well lived. And days well lived, we don't get many of them a year, really, when you stop and think about all those days when you go to bed and you're just like buzzing, or you're like, wow, that was a day well lived. And I think we all need as many DWLs as possible in life, because that adds up to a LWL.
Life well lived.
Yeah, well, you got it, mate.
I'm catching on. After nearly 6 years, I'm catching on. Also, just to say, if you have to promote the socks off this, You can't just assume people are going to show up. And this means scheduling daily tweets, putting stuff on Facebook. And
inviting people by email directly works as well, actually.
The personal touch definitely works. Because on the day I had 3 or 4 people message me saying, I'm so sorry I can't make it. I was going to make it, but I can't make it. And, that's when the knees start knocking. But you do have to do that. I mean, I had someone yesterday, someone who follows me on Twitter, is a big fan of the books. And they said, oh, I didn't realise your 3rd book was out.
Right?
And I carpet bomb Twitter with the stuff, but you have to remember Twitter is a gushing river, or sewer, some people might say, of content, and people aren't on there all the time hanging off your every word. So just putting up one tweet going, I'm having a launch party, and then wondering why no one has shown up.
Yeah.
You've got to get serious about this stuff.
Absolutely brilliant. Well, talking about getting serious, we have the return of an author who was very much influenced career-wise by this very podcast. So tell us about our special guest today, Mike.
Oh, he's so close to our hearts, Mr. Mike Shackle. Mike he's lived all over the world. He's originally from London, but he's lived in Hong Kong, Singapore, Beijing, New York, Dubai. He now lives in somewhere called Vancouver. Not too far from you, Mr. D. And he's done all sorts. He's sold washing machines. He's cooked for royalty. He's designed logos. He's made ads. But he's written an amazing trilogy, the Last War series, published by Gollancz. And the first in the series is We Are the Dead. The second is A Fool's Hope. And out this week is the final book in this series, Until the Last. Now, Mike has been on the podcast before, and I'll put links to these in the show notes as well. Episode 210 in an episode called Never Give Up, Never Surrender, which is very apt. And he also joined us as his alter ego, because he also self-publishes under the name Mike Morris. And also, he's written a children's book too, under the name Mike Arthur, and we talk about that a bit in the interview, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that as well, so you can check that out. But Mike is very close to our hearts. He talks about why scrapping drafts has become a part of his process, how sketching and drawing has helped inspire him, and we compare his experience indie publishing and traditional publishing. And last but not least, we talk about how the bestseller experiment made him the writer he is today, which might be overstating it, but it just might be. I don't know. We'll see. But it was a joy to speak to Mike.
Brilliant. So let's dive in and listen to the two of us speaking with the lovely, lovely Mike Shackle.
Mike Shackle, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How on the devil are you, sir?
Really, really good. Very excited to be here chatting with you both again.
It's absolutely lovely to see you, Mike. And I was going to say, if anyone's watching this interview on YouTube, I'm feeling very, very jealous right now, because Mr. Stay and Mr. Shackle both have lots of memorabilia in the background. Star Wars, Marvel. It looks like you've got quite a collection there, Mike. Is this something that started at childhood?
Well, it did. I became completely obsessed before I could read with Marvel comics. My friend next door had an older brother, and he had all these really cool black and white Marvel comics reprints that they used to do in the UK. And I used to just love looking at the pictures, but I couldn't read. And I actually learned how to read very early because I was obsessed with these comics and I wanted to know what was going on. My parents tried banning me from reading them for a while because I started getting really bad nightmares and everything else. But I think that was just my imagination being kick-started by Jack Kirby and Stan Lee and things like that. And then Star Wars happened when I was about 7. So basically my mental progression stopped at that age. And I've just stayed obsessed with all the same things ever since.
Fantastic. Now, Mike, we last spoke to you in episode 210, which feels like a whole lifetime ago in this podcast. But for people who are new to the podcast, give them a very quick kind of potted history of what happened up to that point, all the crazy journeys that you've been on.
Well, I think my whole writing career is timed perfectly with the history of the podcast, because I'd been writing in my spare time. I'd written 3 books, I think, and had got really nice rejections from agents and hadn't got anywhere. And I was on the verge of giving up. And I saw Joe Abercrombie tweeted about his interview with you. I looked it up, and I remember being really annoyed that I couldn't just read the interview. I'd never listened to any podcast of any sort before. And I was really angry that I had to download this, app and listen to it. Anyway, but in that, he came out with a typical Joe Abercrombie bit of advice about, the only way you can guarantee success is to keep going. He said, the longer you dance naked in the rain, the better the chance of being hit by lightning. And that just really made me realize that I could only guarantee not to make it as a writer by giving up. But if I carried on, if I wrote another book or another book after that, I'd always have a chance of getting published, having people read it, all those sort of basic sort of ambitions that we have. So I sat down, I wrote a list of the things I like reading books about. And then We Are the Dead came from that. And it happened very quickly. It was about 6 months from start to finish in writing it. But it was probably the first time when I had a vague idea of how to write, as Mark's holding up my book there for those on YouTube the other day. I'm totally prepared and don't have any next to it. But there was something I just felt really re-energized by that, and then I and I was listening to your podcast every week then, and it always seemed like there was a new nugget of information that was helping me become better at what I was doing. And you both mentioned John York and Into the Woods and the structure of stories, and I read the book and then signed up for his course because you had this kind of 50% off offer going on, and I snatched that up and I did that. And it was all these things happening at the same time that kind of got me into this place where it allowed me to level up enough to get past getting nice rejections. And I had an agent once who liked a book I'd written but said it was unpublishable. And then we'd stayed in touch, and I told him what I was writing. And he said to me, well, I'd love to read it, just off the premise. So I sent it to him. He was the only one that had seen it. And he wrote back to me a week later and said, I want to rep you. And we worked on it together for a little while. And then in January of, I don't even know what year we're in now, January, whatever it was.
Doesn't really matter anymore, does it?
Yeah, back then, but we sent it out. It went off to all the publishers. We had a lot of interest. There was an auction, and Gollancz signed me to a 3-book deal.
Fantastic.
On my birthday, which was amazing. So it was like almost, and Gollancz was always the publisher I wanted to be with. I mean, I love all the other publishers. They're all great. And if I ever send them my books, it's because I love you now. But Gollancz have been fantastic, and they were my dream. And it was just like, yes, I've written a great book. Yes, I've got an agent. Yes, I've got my dream publisher. And it all happened really, really quickly in book publishing terms. It was quite amazing, really.
So, because when we last spoke to you, you were at the beginning of the journey. So I've got We Are the Dead here, and I've got A Fool's Hope here, and here we are. It's this will be released in July 2022. Until the Last wraps up the Last War series.
Yeah. First
of all, can you tell us how it feels like to complete this? I mean, these are not slim books. These are proper chunky epic. If you love your epic fantasy, folks, I mean, feel the weight of that. That is quality. So, this is what does it feel like to complete an epic trilogy and to complete, that contract, to complete that dream, to bring it to an end?
Well, I mean, it's really funny because when I first pitched the idea, I wanted to write 5 books. Right, I was like, it's definitely a 5-book series, and my agent was like, they'll only buy 3. And Gollancz like 3 is the magic number. So basically each book gets longer, because I had to get 5 books worth of material in. So, the first book was about 150,000. The second one was 200,000. And then the third one's 250,000. So they're chunky books. And then you get all these random characters that suddenly started coming in that made it bigger and more sprawling. And that was challenging because when you've got 5 or 6 point of view characters, each one's got to have their own story. They've got to go through their own arc. And in many ways, it's having 6 identical novels all happening at the same time that you have to weave in. And when I had a plan for the books because you have to when you sell it to the publishers. They're like, well, what are the other 2 books about? And you write in a day, this is what could happen. And I stayed relatively true to that, but I didn't as well, because the story took me off in different directions, and I'm a terrible planner. And my characters then refuse to follow my plans anyway, because they become very lifelike in my mind. So it was really challenging. And then when I was writing the second book, you go from, I want to get published, can I get an agent? Suddenly I've got a deal, the expectations of being good. And you're like, what if this was just a fluke? What if I blew it all on that first book? And that doubt I found really difficult in the second one. And then you get these moments when the story's not working, right? You've driven down that cul-de-sac and you're looking at the map and you're like, I don't know how I got there. I don't know how to get out. And you need to backtrack. And I ended up scrapping 2 drafts at 65,000 words.
Both times? The same?
I did it twice on a Fool's Hope, right? And I had to go back and really sit down and work out where it had gone wrong. And you don't really know, because it's just this instinctive, this isn't working. And part of that maybe is insecurity and doubt, but then there's also this, it's not working. And I found that really difficult and a very lonely place to be in, to then try and then backtrack enough to then get back on the right road and get to the end. And I remember sending the book off to my agent, my editor, and I just thought they were going to write back and go, what have you done? This is terrible. I was really expecting that. And they wrote back again, this is great. There's a couple of tweaks and maybe we could move this and what about that? And, really minor structural changes. And I'm like, have they read the book? Do they care about it? Like, why are they happy with this thing? And then it comes out and the reviews are all, this is so much better and this is an amazing book too. And you're like, oh, wow, I didn't blow it. And then you start writing the third one, and that weight of insecurity that was there on the second one has just now doubled in size, right? Because now you've got to end it, right? You've got to. And I've always written, I've never held anything back. I've never had an idea and I thought I'm going to save that for this point, right? It's always been, I'm going to write as if this is the last book I'm ever going to write, and I'm going to leave everything on the page. And I also had this rule that no one was safe. I didn't care if they were one of the stars of the book, right? If you're going to die, you're going to die, and there isn't going to be any getting out of what happens. And that was quite brutal writing with that in mind, because you get to these moments and you're really attached to these characters, and you're like, well, I'm sorry, but
bye.
There's curtains, and you get readers writing to go, oh, my favorite character is X. I really love them, and you're like, oh dear, what have I just done to them? But and then writing that third book, and then the pandemic happened, right? And my books are quite dark books, and especially when it first started, I couldn't get myself into that headspace to write in my world, just because I was worrying about everything else that was going on. And I ended up doing a cartoon series of just family life every day, because I needed to do something. I needed to be creative, and I needed almost the complete opposite of my last war books. I needed something really warm and fuzzy and Calvin and Hobbesy to make me feel good about life. And I ended up doing a children's book for my daughter, which I wrote and illustrated. But it was like, I've got this contract out there that's waiting for me. And in the end, I was just like, I have to, because I was living by 2 weeks at that point. You think this is all going to be over. And then when I realized it was going to go on, I had to sit down and write and finish this monster. But again, I scrapped the book halfway through again, probably about 100,000 words in, and started again.
Mike, what keeps you going at that point? Because I know there's a lot of people out there who they'll get to that point where they've put in the equivalent of what for many people is almost a novel and a half, 100,000 words. What what actually happens at that point? Because I mean, you've been through it a few times before. What words of wisdom would you give people if they're staring at that manuscript and just thinking, I've got to start this again?
The only thing that gives me comfort now is, unfortunately, I think it's part of my process. You know, and I literally now, and I think I saw an interview with Ian Rankin where he said, I always come down, I tell my wife it's not working. She'll say, oh, you're at 65,000 words, aren't you? You know, and I think there's that point where you're into the story and you know the characters, and then you're asking yourself those really hard questions about, is this really hitting the emotional points that I want? Am I really being true to this? Am I just taking an easy way out? And I think the difference in the very first books I started writing is I didn't ask myself those hard questions, and I carried on and I just wrote because you just want to finish a book. And now I just accept it's my brain telling me you have to make this better. You have to really push what you're doing to make it more exciting, more thrilling, and that stuff. So it is frustrating, but in book 2 I was having a breakdown and, you know, going crazy. And in book 3 I just went, okay, there's things you need to fix in the story. And I think a lot of authors will finish the draft and then go, you know, the 0 draft and go back and then start rebuilding it, where I can't. I literally have to go, stop, look at it, pull the bit. You know, you don't scrap everything, right? They're character arts that are working, and you pull the bits out and amputate the bits that aren't working. And it's just unfortunately the way I work. You know, it's just a painful process. And you know, someone said, you know, they don't love writing, but they love having written.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I've compared it to giving birth, and my wife just went, "You know nothing about giving birth," right? But there is something, right? Because you carry this thing around, and it's uncomfortable, and it's difficult, and it fills your head up in so many ways where you become very difficult to be around. But then once it's done, you're like, "Oh, look at my lovely baby," and isn't she beautiful, and everything else like that. So,
whereas when you carry a novel around for 9 months and then decide to scrap it and start again, that's a whole different kind of, because you don't have the joy of the finishing, the passing the finish line in some ways.
But it's weird because, you know, I really love that John York structure, right? That 5-arc structure that he has in the midpoint, and if you actually put the 3 books down and you can run that spine through each individual one, but you can run it through all the series, and the midpoint of book 2 is literally the mid, you know, it's that turning point that then makes everything else happen. So it works on that grand scale across the trilogy and then on individual books as well. So, you know, I've been living with these characters in my head for 5 years, and you know, they're really fun to write. You know, even the really horrible ones are wonderful, and I enjoy spending my little chapter with them and then going off and writing about someone else.
You said that it's hard for, you know, readers to part company with the characters. How is it for you? I mean, is this it for them, or?
There's quite a high body count in this one. So, I was talking to my dad, and it's like, there is going to be a happy ending, isn't there? There is, like, you know, but I mean, it's a war book. It is, and I've tried being really, really, you know, there's magic and there's flying people and all that kind of stuff, but it's war, and you know, it's not about the bullet that's got your name on it. It's all about all the ones that are marked "to whom it may concern." You know, like, you could be the hero, but if you take the wrong step in the wrong place, and you're gone. So yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I cried at the end of writing it. I must admit, there was a few tears shed.
That's a good thing, though, in some ways, Mike, isn't there? Because I think if you just be like, right, done, off down the pub, and there was no kind of emotional connection to it, you'd be probably pretty worried.
No, you know, and I am really, and there's part of me that's sad that I won't be writing about them again, because I know the world and I know the characters. In many ways, it's easier. But now I'm starting a new book, and it's a new world with everything else. You're going through all those kind of pains again of taking steps out down streets you don't know too well, trying to work out who's lurking around the corners and things like that. And then, and I've used all my good ideas up now, right? I need to find the more exciting ones, and so there's different challenges with the new book, which is quite exciting.
So tell us about the new book, Mike. What's following the trilogy?
Well, I've actually written 2 other books since finishing Until the Last. I helped my good friend Mike Morris out with a couple of books, and now I'm starting. Yeah, I can't really tell you too much. I'm really sensitive about, because actually there is another book came out recently, which I saw the cover reveal on Twitter, and I had a shock because it was identical visually to what I'd been doing. And I do a lot of illustrations of where I'm going with my work, and I'd been posting a lot up, and this thing came up, and I went into panic about it because I thought it was exactly the same story. But in many ways it was good because that then forced me to go in a different direction that I'm really happy with. Or is set in a kind of, again, fancy world, French Revolution. The guillotine is in it a lot, which I still can't spell on the first attempt. But yeah, it's a much more heroic story. I didn't know I was writing a grimdark fantasy when I wrote We Are the Dead, despite the title. And I want to do something that's a lot more inspiring, a lot more heroic. Again, I think the world needs that. I think the world's dark enough, right? There's, the stuff that's going on the news and in different countries so horrific. I think people need heroes and things to get excited about and escape to. And that's kind of where I am at the moment.
Cool stuff. Now, I'd like to talk about your good friend Mike Morris in a minute, but before that, I just want to go back to your artwork because, folks, Mike's artwork, particularly the cartoons you did for your family during lockdown, they were completely adorable and completely charming and totally wonderful. But you also do character art for your fiction as well. Yeah. How does that help, having this other outlet to explore these characters? Is that something that you've always done, or was it something that you found particularly helpful during lockdown when things were feeling pretty dark?
I grew up on Marvel comics, right? So I wanted to be a comic book artist growing up, and I didn't want to write. I just wanted to draw and do visual stuff. And then as you grow older, you get all these people who are like, well, what are you going to do for a real career? And real people don't do jobs like that. Britain in the 80s wasn't about being, especially at my school, wasn't about being creative, right? It was all about you're going to have a business career and what are you going to do? So I kind of stopped doing it for a long time. But I went into advertising. My day job is in advertising as a creative director. So I was doing that, and the writing actually started very much as a way of me being creative without anyone to be responsible to. It was my little escape from my day job so I could make stuff and feel free doing it. And then when I sold the book, that creative escape became a very serious job. So I then needed something else that I could do that was creative. And then that allowed me to again escape and not think about things. So I started drawing again. And I was doing stuff with my son. He was obviously into superheroes and stuff. And that really was my excuse to start off with, was like, I'm drawing a picture for my little boy and it's great, but really it was for me. And you go out and buy more expensive pens and things like that. And then it just became this other way of expressing myself. And especially during the beginning of the pandemic, it was, as I said, that escape to be funny about something that really was quite frightening. And laugh about the absurdity of fighting for toilet roll at 8 a.m. in the morning and all those stupid things that we all had to go through. And again, it started off, it was like quick scribbles with marker pens. Then I went and got paint and I started, they got much better as I went along because I started taking it more seriously. And then someone said, oh, you should publish this book. And I was like, well, yeah, but then I'd have to go back and redo all the really rough ones at the beginning and make it good. So I stopped that from happening, but I did about 60 cartoons, I think.
Wow.
Over one a day over the first couple of months of the pandemic.
There's something incredibly cathartic about drawing, isn't there? Especially during kind of unsettling times.
But then with the character art that I do, that really started. Again, when I started signing books, right, I was thinking like, well, if I'm going to send someone a book, my signature's worth nothing, right? So what else can I do to make it, that they'll look at it and go, wow, I got something quite cool. So I started doing doodles in the books that I signed for people of different characters and things like that. And then it got to the point where I'd ask them what their favorite characters were. And I was really enjoying that. And then I was doing full on paintings of how I saw them. And again, it's just a way of staying in that world, but not worrying about what you're producing and having fun. And people seem to like them. So, again, if people tell me they like it, I'll keep on doing it. It's I'll do anything for a brief hit of dopamine and gratitude and stuff.
I love it.
You're doing some character art for the launch as well, aren't you? You're doing a sort of postcard giveaway thing. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, that I haven't costed this outright, so
right.
I did it with A Fool's Hope. There was a chap who was working at Waterstones who's now set up a bookshop called the Broken Binding, which is is a brilliant online retailer, and he really loves fantasy and he loves books. And he asked me to send him a load of signed book plates so he could stick them in the books. And I said, well, if you can do that, I'll print up some postcards for you. And you can send those out as well. So it just made it a bit special. And now with the new one coming out, again, I was just thinking, well, what could I do for sellers like him, or if people get in touch with me that I can post out that's a bit more than just getting a tiny little sticker from me in the post. So I've done 4 so far. They're black and white. I've written a little comic book, speech bubble things in it. So it's like a page from a comic book. And the plan is to print them as a set of 8. I think it'll be about 8 postcards that people like the Broken Binding or anyone can have. And I'll just post out. So, it's an excuse for me to draw again and justify spending all the money on the pens and the paper,
And your friend Mike Morris. Okay, so let's break this out now. So you write as Mike Morris. Most recently, you've been writing the Cursed Sword saga. So you've got He Who Fights, The Hunted, and Once a Hero, which came out in March 2022. Do you approach the Morris books any differently to the Shackle books? Do you go in with a different kind of, not just a different name, but a different mindset?
Well, yes and no. No, they are definitely different, but they didn't start off that way. I mean, when again, it's all your fault, right? I blame you for everything in my life. But when I finished writing We Are the Dead, I'd been laid off from my job. I needed to make some money. And you did the interview with Mark Dawson. And he was like, I make X million self-publishing. And I'd always thought self-publishing was for bad books that weren't good enough at that point. And I read his books, and then I started looking at fantasy books, and they're these, incredible fantasy authors that self-publish, like, Rob Hayes, Ben Galley. There's a great tribe of people that were doing it, and I loved their books. And they were as good as anything that I was reading from the mainstream publishers. And I thought, well, I've got these 3 books that I'd written. Maybe if I release them, I can make some money, right? I needed, whatever I made is even if I made $5, it was $5 more than I got for them sitting in my, bottom drawer. So I released one which had got the most interest from agents when I'd written it, and it sold nothing. It was this science fiction story about China ruling the world. And then, so when that bombed, I then looked at another one, which was called Cry Havoc. And I actually rewrote it with the experience that I had and did the cover for it. And put that out there, and it just took off. And, at the time I thought it was because I was a genius and I'd done all the right covers and stuff, but a lot of it was luck and people picking up on it, and it took off. And the reason Mike Morris became a person was because I had interest in Mike Shackle and We Are the Dead. And I thought, well, if these bomb and people hate them, I didn't want to damage that brand. So I put them under the Mike Morris name, because if it's a failure, then, no one knows about it. It's fine. But he became very successful. Cry Havoc went top 10 in the US, top 5 in the UK. It shifted serious numbers. And then after I'd sold Rather Dead, I was like, well, I better write another Cry Havoc book. So I wrote, there was Cry Fear and Cry Witch. I did. And then the plan was always to write a Mike Shackle book, then do a Mike Morris book and everything else. But because A Fool's Hope and Until Last turned into these nightmare beasts, I just didn't have the time. So Mike Morris's sales, so over the course of writing the Gollancz books, just went down to, I'm not saying there was zero, but it was, it was pretty terminal, because I wasn't advertising. I wasn't putting new product out there. And then really after I finished Until the Last, I wanted to write, but I wanted to write without the weight of what had been on my back. So again, it was to get back into the Mike Morris world was a fun way to be creative without a deadline, without expectations. And it was just great. And I wrote these 2 books. They're 100,000 words each. And the way I see it now, I think Mike Shackle books are like cinema, right? It's like going to the movies and seeing this big epic Dune-esque experience. And then the Mike Morris books are like watching The Mandalorian on TV. Nice. It's an hour's entertainment. It's fun. You're not going to have to think too hard, but you're going to have fun while you read it, and you're going to have a good time. And for $2.99 or $3.99, whatever it is great value for money, right? And it's something that I can have fun doing as a way of purging what's gone before, and still create. So the plan is now to stick to that, do Mike Shackle, then a couple of Mike Morris books, and see if I can keep it going.
When you said that the Mike Morris books took off, Mike, was that just a kind of a word of mouth algorithm thing that just naturally kicked in, or were you really kind of playing the, looking at all the marketing and doing all the best practices?
I could lie to you and say, it was pure fluke. No, I had a nice cover, right? I had the hooded guy with a sword that everyone loved on fancy covers and things like that. But the first book, Switchblade, sold like 20 copies. And that was probably my dad, my sister, and people like that. And some of the reviews to start off with were quite scathing, because if you're an American and read it, they were the bad guys in the book and they were the terrorists. And, the few people got upset about it. So I then put this next book out with no expectations. It was 99p, and it just started selling, right? And every day I was like, oh, I've done 10 copies. Oh, I've done 20 copies. Oh, I've now done 30 copies a day. And I put the price up, and it just carried on selling. And it was a lot of luck, really. And then when it hit the top 100, it then got visibility, and then that kicked it on further. So yeah, I'd like to say, it's a good book. It's a fun book, and it's, again, got all those. I wrote it very much as a fan who loved fantasy stories, and I remember writing down the structure of Star Wars and The Matrix and that classic hero's journey when I was trying to work out how to write a book. And it's got all that, and there's a lot of naivety in it, which kind of propels the character along, because he's naive and he doesn't know what's going on. And I think people like it, and it's still sold more copies than anything else I've written.
Wow, that's incredible!
Which is quite funny,
and absolutely brilliant as well, and very inspiring as well to other people who are, like you talked about. There's a lot of people that have this kind of still a sense that you're never really going to be successful unless you sign to a major.
I think the wonderful thing and the disheartening thing is luck is so important to all of this, right? It's you can write the best book that's ever existed, but you need all these other things in the universe to click into place sometimes to help it take off. And then there's also stuff that can happen that you've got no control of. You know, launching a book called We Are the Dead as a pandemic hits wasn't the best, right? It launched in the States 2 weeks after they'd locked the whole country down. You know, and I was doing a book launch here in Canada and we had to cancel because, we're all shut in our homes. So there's all this stuff that gets in the way of selling. There's also other stuff that happens that is quite marvelous, And I keep looking back to that day I saw a tweet from Joe Abercrombie and saw about your podcast that, that literally changed my life because I wasn't going to write. I was going to watch Netflix and hang out with my wife and be more productive with all that time I was agonizing in. And that's where all the luck comes into it. And I think without getting too hippie, but I think the universe sometimes pushes you in directions that you're meant to go in. And same at the time when I lost my job, Mike Morris came into existence. That was a very traumatic period for me. But from that, something else was born that I believe was meant to exist in the world. And sometimes you just got to sit back and go, this is an opportunity to break free from what I've been doing and going in a new direction that I want to go in, that I'm meant to go in. So yeah, I mean, luck is out there and the universe is doing these things, and sometimes you just need to tune into it and go with the flow.
That is very hippy dippy, Mike, and Mr. D is loving it.
I'm loving it. Well, we're both on the west coast of Canada, so I think we can own that totally. But yeah. I think you're right, Mike, and I think it's really interesting what you said, because I think there's a lot of authors out there. Well, we know there are a lot of authors out in the world, a lot of authors listening to this right now, who are on the verge of giving up, who are on the verge of never getting started. In many cases, it's like, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, I'm never going to be an author. And yet your story is so inspiring because you've been in that place. You were made redundant. You're on the verge of giving up your writing, And so what would you say to those people who are sitting here right now going, wow, this sounds a bit like my story at the moment? What would you say to encourage them to keep going?
Drink lots of gin and tonic. No,
well, that helps.
no, but look, it's difficult, and I think writing isn't easy, and the reason most people give up is because it's difficult. It's a really hard process, right? You start off and you've got all the enthusiasm of I'm going to write, and then you get 5,000 words in, and suddenly getting up early in the morning doesn't seem like a good idea, or you want to watch that TV show instead of sitting down and writing. And as you say, you've got to make that habit of writing, and that's where the real desire to create comes in, because you've got to sacrifice all this other stuff as you're doing it. And that moment I had was, I realized I didn't care really if I got published. I just wanted to make stuff, and I didn't really care if anyone read what I was doing. And once I freed myself of I must do this, I must do that, and I thought, let's just make something that I'm really, really proud of. That for me was in many ways the turning point. And there is money in publishing, but there's not fortunes in it. I'm not driving around in a Rolls Royce out there. It's you got to do it because you love making stuff and love telling stories, and you got to get that personal enjoyment from the process to keep you going. And I think that's where people fall out. And I saw a statistic actually about the amount of authors that finish their first contract and never publish again. And it's incredibly high.
Yeah. Like
the fallout rate. If we talk about, the percentage of people that will sell a book and get an agent is minuscule. You get an agent to get a publishing deal is another slice go, and then you do those first books, and it's a tough experience publishing, right? There's stuff that you don't know about that happens that can be quite disheartening at times and demotivating, and you've got to always keep going. And I think it's something like 78% of authors don't do another series. I mean, it's incredibly high.
Yeah.
And there's good reasons for that, right? So that endurance you build right in those first books, and that determination and that kind of, I won't swear because it's a nice podcast, but you got to, you got to find whatever that is, motivation to push yourself to keep going, because there are barriers at every stage that will make you want to quit. And in many ways, that's why I like having this kind of alter ego that can do stuff, because again, you just free yourself for a while of all the demotivating stuff, and you have fun, and then you launch yourself back into running the marathon again, and you get ready to go. And starting this new book, I know I've got 3 or 4 or 5 years if someone buys it, right? I'm still not guaranteed someone's going to buy it, of these characters in this world, and that's a long time in your life to commit to something. I don't know how long you've been writing the Woodfield books now, Mark, but they're with you, aren't you? It's a commitment now. And you like your marriage, like anything, it takes determination. You've got to go through the highs and lows of it all.
It is fascinating, and I think the fact that you're kind of working in that hybrid world as well, where you're self-publishing under one name and you have a traditional publishing contract another. In some ways, I think that can really help, because it gives you a bit more of a sense of a balance of two different approaches. Because I do think a lot of people don't talk about the industry route, where a lot of people, I mean, again, we've seen this in the music as well, like people go in, they get signed to major labels and they get chewed up and spat out, and it can be destroying for a career. But having that independent route as well, it just keeps that balance and perspective. And I think that's why today is such a different place to be compared to, say, even just 20 years ago, where really there was only one option.
Well, and I think publishing is it's in a state now where it's changing on such a massive level, because there are fewer and fewer bookstores around. The amount of shelf space available for your category of books, right? So fancy books, you go into Waterstones, right? They're stocking Tolkien, they're stocking Robert Jordan, they're stocking Brandon Sanderson, they're stocking Joe Abercrombie, George Martin, the sellers that they shift huge amounts, right? And in that one shelf, in that one bookshop, that leaves you actually maybe 2 shelves for new books and new authors to come through. So that the competition just to get into a bookshop is incredible now. So being traditionally published is not a guarantee your book is going to be in a bookstore, right? And so that whole dream of seeing your book in a bookshop might not happen just because you've been signed by Orbit or Gollancz or whoever it is, right? So that's an eye-opener in itself, right? So if you're going, well, if all my publisher is doing is putting me on Amazon or Barnes & Noble online or wherever it is, then what is the difference between self-publishing and doing it, right? And then you go, well, but you get to work with all these great, amazing editors, but now most of those editors are working freelance anyway, right? So again, it all comes down to money. If you have money, you can hire Chris McGrath to do your covers. You can go and speak to that amazing editor that and put them all together, and you can control your advertising yourself, because again, the trad publishers will push the launch, and then they move on to the next book they have to push launch to, right? So you get a hit and a bit of love for them for a period of time, and then it's up to you to keep that momentum going. So again, there are all these questions you have to ask yourself about where we're going with publishing. And then you see people like Brandon Sanderson, who's basically used trad publishing to build a career, and now it's going, well, you've invested all that money and built my audience for me. I'm now going to launch a Kickstarter and make $40 million.
Yeah.
Right? And you can't tell me Stephen King, if he's sitting there and if he can be bothered, you know, there's an opportunity there to do that. So the routes people have are endless now, and that the only thing trad publishing really gives you is that kind of, I'm serious, right? You know, if you talk to people and say I'm a writer, and they say, well, you know, are you self-published or not? You immediately get that kind of gravitas of, well, actually, I'm with so and so. But that's an ego thing, right? So if you don't care about the ego and you want to tell stories and you want to do it for a living, then there's so many ways you can do that now, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, It's super exciting, and it's more opportunity than ever, but more options than ever, which in itself brings a challenge, because it's like, you know, you're standing in this pathway in the forest and there's like, you know, 1,000 pathways. It's which one do I go down? Which one to go down? And there's the stress of choosing the wrong one or not choosing the right one.
Yeah, but I'm like, let's go down all of them.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And that's the exciting thing about it all, you know. And then you end up in that cul-de-sac, and you got to backtrack and work out how to get there. But it's exciting. It is
exciting.
What I love about publishing is everyone I've met is fantastic, you know, really nice. And I come from advertising, which is a horrible backstabbing, egotistical way to earn a living, and suddenly every author I meet, there's no competition. Everyone's book fans that want to tell you about their favorite authors and that great book you've just read, and they want to give you a bit of advice and tell you how to navigate this challenge and things like that. It's the most supportive community and business that I've ever been involved in, and even that helps you on the bad days. And a reader writing a review or sending you an email, I don't think they realize how important that is, because we are sat here on our own, trapped in our own heads with all the madness that goes on, particularly inside my brain. You know, so to actually get someone that says, you know, you've done something special here, and I love this character, and thank you very much, that gives you that dopamine hit to keep going. So it's been amazing. Brilliant. And in fact, and I'm sorry if I'm waffling, there was someone wrote a review about We Are the Dead, and there was a throwaway character that I'd forgotten I'd even mentioned, and they were like, oh, I wonder if so-and-so is going to be revealed to be the big bad guy. And I was like, well, he's not, but I'd forgotten about this character. And I was halfway through writing until the last, and I was like, but what happened to that character? He, you know, that one line that I wrote as a throwaway, and he then became a major character in the final book. And I actually went back and redid all the beginning bit, and it actually changes the whole overlook of the book and how it's come together. And it was purely down to one reviewer having a completely wrong idea about what could happen, but I'm nicking that. Thank you.
I love it. You totally have to get in contact with that reviewer.
Oh no, I think I've thanked them in the back of the book as well.
I was going to say that just shows you the power. So folks, just remember, if you listen out there, if you never reviewed a book on Amazon, go review it, because you might change the course of an entire trilogy.
Like, you know, and the book bloggers and booktubers and all those, they're the most amazing people that do it, again, because they do it because they love books. They're not getting paid, and they you know, thank you every single person that's ever written. I only get good reviews, so it's good. So, but you know, everyone who writes anything, it's really appreciated, good or bad.
Yeah, brilliant stuff, Mike. Well, listen, we wish you all the best with Until the Last, and for people that are interested in finding out more about both of your alter egos, where would they go to do that, Mike, on social media?
I'm at Mike Shackle on Twitter and Instagram and all that kind of stuff. Mike Morris doesn't tweet so much, but he's at sci-fi Mike Morris on Twitter. But I can write as two different people, but trying to run social media stuff. He really doesn't do too much anymore. He's just, you know, he'll pop up and say there's a new book coming out. But,
social media is hard enough for one author, let alone two.
And it's a time suck, and you know, I don't know how people run all these different accounts and personalities and stuff.
Well, Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure sharing this journey with you, this trilogy with you, seeing the extraordinary things that have happened. And as Mr. D says, we know this is going to inspire writers out there to knuckle down, finish things, and get stuff out there. So thank you so much for speaking to us and sharing that with us. It's just amazing.
And all our very best for your onward journey.
Sorry, but thank you. No, but seriously, you guys have literally changed my life. All these books wouldn't exist without what you do. And I really appreciate the effort. And I know everyone else does that listens to what you do and the work you put into every episode. And thank you for that as well.
Oh, thanks,
That's very, very kind of you, Mike. Thank you so much. What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Oh, it's always lovely hearing stories like that, Mark, isn't it? Just wonderful, wonderful stories. And I know that there's so many other people out there who, have got similar stories to tell as well. And it just shows when you get in contact, you get these, all kinds of things can happen, from book deals to interviews on this podcast. So congratulations again, Mike. Absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
It is fantastic.
And it's going to be interesting to see how, as we mentioned, how Mike's journey is going to continue over the next few years. I know that this is definitely not the end of a chapter, but it's the beginning of what lies beyond. It's going to be very, very exciting for him.
Absolutely. Now, I mentioned his artwork. Weirdly, Mike has been doing art. He's done a couple of pictures based on scenes from The Crow Folk, which blew me away.
I saw them. They're great.
Honor. Yeah, they're fantastic. Also, if the stories that he did, the cartoon that he wrote about his daughter is now a book. It's called I Believe in Me, and it's on sale on Amazon under the name Mike Arthur. I'll put a link in the show notes to that so you can download that, so you can see those illustrations that he was talking about. But Mike is a massive talent, and it's a pleasure to speak to him.
Brilliant stuff. Well, we're running out of time, Mr. Stay, so I think we'll leave social media to next week, shall we?
Yep, I think so.
Brilliant stuff. So let's just remind people where they can find out about the podcast and all the other great things going on.
Yes, come and find us at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. We can drop us a line. On Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment, and Twitter and Instagram, we are at BestsellerXP. Please subscribe with your podcast catcher. Give us a rating, give us a review, whatever can help spread the word. Go to your book groups, tell them about us. Maybe you could be on the show one day like Mike.
Absolutely. And if you'd like to join in our free 200-word challenge, if you want to get the habit of a lifetime of writing, simply go along to 200wordchallenge.com. If you would like to get updates from us every week about the new episode, what you'll learn from it, and all the great things happening at Bestseller HQ, pop along to the website, and that's bestsellerexperiment.com, and click on the newsletter tab and pop your email in there. And finally, if you would like to get Mark and I as your coaches on an ongoing monthly basis, plus access to hundreds of hours of content, courses, and more, pop along to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com and join us at the Bestseller Academy. So, Mr. Stay, have a fantastic week. I hope you get a chance to rest and relax after the bonkers week that you had, and hopefully inspiring other people to get out there, get out into the world, folks. Think about your book launch even long before that final words of the end are written, because this is where the rubber meets the road and it really starts to take off for you, doesn't it? So let's hear about those stories as well. If you're in the middle of doing one, or if you've just done a book launch, drop us a note, tell us how it went. We'd love to hear about it and maybe give you a mention on the podcast. So, Mr. Stay, have a great week, sir.
You too, sir. Have a good one.
Excellent. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.